So glad to have all these people of like precious faith out here this morning, gathered together for worship. I'm just going to say right off the bat, I'm going to ask for your pardon because I've spent most of the weekend singing for 8 hours a day, and I'm really hoping that my voice holds out, but we're going to see how that goes. But you may have to be a little patient with me this morning. But I'm really glad to have a chance to speak again, speak to you from God's Word. And I want to continue somewhat in the same vein as last Sunday when I spoke. And I'm going to be combining some of what I talked about last Sunday with a little bit of what I did this weekend. And that is singing and preaching about the deity of Christ. And I'm going to do that by focusing on Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. What I mean by that is there are many scholars who think that this text we're going to be looking at, Philippians chapter 2, contains partially a hymn that was sung by the early church. Isn't that interesting? I love songs. I love to see what other Christians enjoy singing, what their favorite songs are as I travel around. And what an interesting thing it is to take a look at what the early Christians may have been singing in their worship. It's got quite a few hefty and lofty theological ideas in here. It's a hymn, in fact, about the deity of Christ. It's actually one of the most comprehensive passages that we have about Jesus's nature and his deity, alongside Colossians 1 and Hebrews 1 and John chapter 1. It's kind of exciting. We're going to read this hymn and we're going to learn some things about Jesus's nature, his relationship with the Father, talk about his exaltation, and we even get some glimpses into things that Jesus was thinking about before he came to this earth, in his pre-incarnate state, when he was the Word, and he was with God, and he was God, as John 1 verse 1 talks about. We're going to learn some about what Jesus was thinking at that time. Pretty incredible thing to consider. But I don't want to scare you, and I don't want you to lose sight of something. I'm starting to realize sometimes when I get excited about things, theologically speaking, other people don't get as excited as I do. And I understand sometimes there is a concern about talking about these theological concepts when really we're just looking for what is the point for me? What's the practical teaching that I need to go out and to do in my life? I don't want you to get scared because I've got a lot of practical suggestions and teaching for you in this lesson. But I'd like for you to simply see and notice how whenever Paul begins to speak of very deep theological ideas, things like who is Jesus and what kind of relationship does he have with the Father, there is always practical teaching to follow. In fact, this whole song about the deity of Christ is in fact a sermon illustration that Paul is making for a larger point about humility and submission in the church. Now, if you know anything about Philippians, by and large, Philippians is a very positive letter. Paul doesn't really have anything negative or wrong to address about the Philippian congregation. There's no great division in the congregation like you read about in the Corinthian letters. And he has a very close and a warm relationship with them. So he has many positive things to say. It's a congregation that at that moment is at peace. And yet, there are still things to do. There are still things to work on to maintain that peace. Because, see, part of Christ's redeeming work in saving people is bringing all of those sinners that he's in the process of saving and redeeming into close proximity with each other in his church. And when you have imperfect people who are in community with each other, there are going to be times where we rub each other the wrong way. There's going to be times where people are thinking for themselves and not necessarily thinking about the interests of others, and that can cause division and strife and difficulty. So there are things to work on, and there are measures, in fact, that we can take to be proactive in promoting peace in the congregation. Think of it this way. One thing I've learned in taking care of my car is it's very important to add oil to the engine regularly. Even in a brand new engine, which is machined perfectly, doesn't have any defects, you have gears interlocking with each other that need to be lubricated. Because in the process of that engine running over time, heat and friction is going to build up. And if there's no oil in the engine, things are going to start to go wrong very quickly. Things are going to crack. Gears are going to shear off, and it's not going to be able to fulfill its proper function. I submit to you that what Paul is talking about here in Philippians chapter 2 is the oil that is going to keep a Christian community successfully running and working in perfect order. I'll give you a hint. The oil that he's talking about is a mindset that all of us need to have. Let's start reading here in Philippians chapter 2. He says in verse 1, "Therefore, if there's any encouragement in Christ, if there's any consolation of love, if there's any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion," and Paul's not raising a question. He's not asking, are these things present? But he's saying, since they are present, or assuming you value these things, encouragement, love, fellowship, affection, and compassion, what are we going to do? Verse 2, "Fulfill my joy that you think the same way, by maintaining the same love, being united in spirit, thinking on one purpose, doing nothing from selfish ambition or vain glory." So there is an incompleteness here. You may have encouragement, love, fellowship, compassion. Paul says those things are great. There's something else to add to make these things complete and to fulfill what's lacking. And that is a proper mindset of humility and submission. I love that song my Uncle John led this morning, "The Power of the Cross." And we sang in the chorus 4 times, "We stand forgiven at the cross." And I've heard this said by many preachers. I don't know who came up with it. I would like to know so I can cite my sources. But I've heard it said many times, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. I love that. It means when you're standing there at the foot of the cross, you're no higher and you're no lower than everybody else who's standing there with you. It's like Paul wrote in Galatians 3:28. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And what he's saying is we have equal spiritual worth in relation to each other. No one can claim they have a higher status than somebody else. We don't have a priestly class of people who are somehow closer to Jesus or have a higher status in relation to anybody else. But what does humility look like in this context. We're all on equal footing. We all have an equality, spiritually speaking, in Christ. So how do we demonstrate humility toward each other? Well, notice, first of all, it requires laying aside a couple of attitudes. Paul says we've got to lay aside selfish ambition. In Aristotle's writings, he uses this word to speak of someone who is seeking political office, but doing so by unfair means. Maybe they're slandering their opponent to try to get the votes, get into the position they want. And that's the idea here. You're taking advantage of others, or you're putting them down so that you can be lifted up and exalted. Unfortunately, there are people in the church who try to do that, who act that way. Back in chapter 1 of Philippians, in verse 17, Paul says the unfortunate reality is there are people who preach Christ, and their motive is selfish ambition. They preach Christ out of pride. They preach Christ because they want to be glorified in and of themselves and puffed up. Romans 2 verse 8 says those kind of people don't obey the truth. They obey unrighteousness, wrath, and anger. We don't need any of that in the church. Paul also says we've got to put aside vain glory. Do nothing from vain glory. And I love this definition I found. Vainglory is exaggerated self-evaluation. When you look at yourself, you grade yourself on a curve. When you look at others, you grade them as you see them. It's about how you view yourself. You exalt yourself above others. Maybe if we're talking in the context of the worship service, and I realize that's not the only time for people to fulfill roles in the church. There's plenty of other work to be done for the service of the church than leading in the worship assembly. But I'm saying these attitudes can be manifest very visibly when we're here in worship, in song leading and preaching and leading prayers. If you are in a leadership capacity in front of the assembly of the church, it's not about you. It's not about your glory or your ambition or your pride. Ideally, when you're up here, you should disappear. We shouldn't be seeing you. Our focus should be on our worship to God. If that's your motivation in getting up to lead a song or to speak or to prayer, you need to get that in check first before you come up here. Paul says, do nothing from selfish ambition or vainglory. We've got to put those things aside. But there is also a mindset to adopt. There's something to put off. There's something to take on as well. And that is verse 4. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Still in verse 3. But with humility of mind, regarding one another as more important than yourselves. Humility of mind. We're going to see what humility of mind means in just a little bit when we get to that hymn about Jesus. But right now, we might say humility of mind is having wants or self-interests or talents or abilities, but being willing to lay them aside in the service of others. It's putting others before yourself. What are some practical ways that we can do that? How can we regard others as more important than ourselves in a healthy way? And I want to stress that. We want to do this in a healthy way because sometimes people regard others as more important than themselves, and they have no self-value whatsoever. That's not a biblical idea. Like we said, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. That means you're no lower than anybody else. And I want to say just really quick, if you are struggling with your self-worth in the church, please seek help for that. Please seek counsel, seek encouragement. Surround yourself with people who are going to build you up. You are not ready to be in a position of giving to others yet. You need others to be giving to you. That's what this is all about. But if you have an understanding of yourself and your worth and the talents that God has given you, one of the ways that you can practice this humility of mind, find opportunities to give others in your congregation their moment. What I mean is, we each have a talent, we each have a strength that God has instilled us with. There's something that we can all contribute to the Lord's body. And it doesn't always have to be about you. You can make place for someone else to exercise their talents. However many talents that you think the Lord has instilled you with, 5 or 2 or 1, and however many you think He may have instilled others with, 1 or 2 or 5, everyone has something to contribute. Help others find a place to use their talents. And at the same time, allow yourself to kind of fade in the background. Let them have their moment. Let me give you an example. I'm going to speak to the younger people in this audience. Young people, if you're having some situation or circumstance of life and an older person in the church notices and they come up to you and they want to give you advice, let them give you advice. That's a biblical concept for the older to teach the younger. I understand maybe sometimes we feel a bit insulted. We feel like, I already know this information. I don't need them to give it to me. Just lay that aside for the moment. They are having an opportunity to share a bit of their wisdom with you that they have learned, share some of their life experience, and it may be something that you really need to hear, even if you don't think you need to hear it. This is an opportunity for you to be humble and to regard another, your elders, as greater than yourself. We can flip this around the other way too. Older folks in the church, if a young person comes and they have a zeal and an excitement for the Lord, and they have perhaps a new idea that they would like to try, and I'm not saying it's an unscriptural idea, just that it's a new one, a new approach maybe for evangelizing, or something new to incorporate our worship. Maybe we switch around the order of the songs a little bit. Maybe we sing more songs. Maybe instead of having preaching, we have someone simply read from the scriptures. These aren't unscriptural things, they're just new ideas maybe. Don't quench their zeal right off the bat simply because it's new. Maybe give them an opportunity to contribute in this way. We put each other before ourselves. And I hope you're seeing here the thing to understand about Christian submission and humility is it is reciprocal. We do it to each other. And this is something that the world doesn't understand about Christian submission. A lot of times we catch flack about submission. People in the world think if you have a right or a talent to do something, you should exercise that at all costs, even if you have to do it to the detriment of others. That's not what we do in the church. And so, yes, we have submission. As Christians, we submit to Christ. As congregations, we submit to our pastors and elders. Wives submit to husbands. Children submit to parents, employees submit to employers, and we all submit to each other. You see how this works? When we're all submitting to each other reciprocally, and we're doing it not as a reward or to be puffed up or to receive some glory of men, but we're doing it because we love God and we love our brothers and sisters. This is how we display a Christ-like attitude in the church. And I'd submit to you, if you hope for your congregation to accomplish things for the kingdom, you need to have this attitude present. We have to have the same love, the same spirit, the same intention of purpose, and the same mindset. I didn't read verse 4, I just now realized, but Paul said this. He said, not merely looking out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. And then he's going to explain how, using this sermon illustration. Verse 5, have this way of thinking in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. And the word yourselves is plural. So he's talking about the congregation. This has got to be a congregational mindset. If you find only a portion of the congregation has a mindset of humility, and then a portion of it is acting from selfish ambition and vainglory, you might be able to get along for some time with great patience on the part of those who are acting in humility. But everyone has to be on board. Everyone has to adopt this mindset of humility for this to work. And Paul's implication is this is a mindset which was in Christ Jesus, and it's an attitude which you not only can, but you must emulate from looking at his example. So what does true humility look like? Here at the start of verse 6, we have the beginning of this hymn about Christ. Maybe you've heard this passage and you've heard teaching on verses 5 through 11, and the focus was on the deity of Christ. And I don't want to take away from that, because there's certainly things to be learned about the deity of Christ here, incredible things. But don't forget, as we're going through this, this is a sermon illustration for a larger point, which is we need to have humility of mind. And it's a demonstration of what it looks like. Now, you'll kind of notice as we walk through this, there is what we call a chiastic structure to this poem. That simply means that the emphasis of the poem is on the point right in the middle and not at the end. In fact, as we start going through, we walk toward the point, which is in the middle, about verse 8. And as we keep reading, we are reflecting back on that point. That's all that scary sounding word means. We read in verse 6, what kind of thinking did Christ have in himself? Verse 6 says, who, although existing in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. This word existing in the Greek is a present active participle. That means there wasn't a point in time where it began. That's not the emphasis, but it's an ongoing existence. He was always existing in this state. What state was he existing in? The form of God. The form of God. This is an expression of the deity of Christ. What kind of form did he exist in before he came to this earth? Last Sunday we read Isaiah chapter 6 and we talked about that. But I'm going to read it again because we have a few new folks who weren't here when we talked about Isaiah 6. But in Isaiah 6, the prophet Isaiah is having a vision of the Lord. And in verse 1, he says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. In John 12, verse 41, John is writing about Jesus and a prophecy Isaiah made about Jesus, and he references Isaiah 6. And he says, Isaiah wrote this because he saw the glory of Jesus, and he wrote about it. So, what kind of form, what kind of glory did Jesus have before he came to this earth? Angels, seraphim, surround him. They sing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. The whole earth is full of his glory. The glory of himself fills that temple. That's the kind of glory. That's the kind of form that Jesus existed in here. Equality with the Father. In fact, it says he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. This is Jesus' action here. He was able to think and consider his equality in relation to the Father. Now, if you're a modalist and you think that the Father and the Son and the Spirit are all one and the same, this doesn't make any sense. The Father can't contemplate his equality with himself, but the Son certainly can. In fact, he did. And it's amazing. In considering his glory, existing in the form of God, he did not regard it as a thing to be grasped. What does it mean to grasp something? This is a little bit of a point of controversy, because you can grasp at something in the sense of reaching out, trying to grab it, attempting to attain it. And this is how the Jehovah's Witnesses take this to mean. They say Jesus was an angelic being. He wasn't God. But he didn't try to reach out and try to grasp and become like God. You could take it that way grammatically, but it doesn't make sense with the very next verse. Look at verse 7. It says he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a slave. He existed in the form of God, but he took on the form of a slave. Now, if Jesus really and truly came in the form of a servant, he truly walked this earth as a human, then certainly he truly existed in the form of God. So the meaning is, Jesus did not regard his glory as something to hold on to, something that wasn't worth giving up, but he was willing to set that aside, to be humbled, and to take on the form of a slave. Some translations say servant, but the meaning is slave. And we don't really like that. We don't like the connotation of humiliation and degradation that being called a slave carries with it. That's what Jesus took on to come to this earth. Notice, he didn't lose anything in his divine nature. He didn't rid himself of those attributes of deity, but he emptied himself by taking this on, by taking the form of a servant. That means he was made in the likeness of men. John 1:14 says, the Word became flesh. He dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. What an amazing thought. The one who created the heavens and the earth, he steps down into his creation. He takes on mortality. And not only that, verse 8, being found in appearance as a man, He humbled himself by becoming obedient. What kind of form does he take on as a man? Does he come as a king? No, as a servant, as a slave. What's more than that? He humbled himself, verse 8, to the point of death, even death on a cross. In the Greek, it literally says, he humbled himself even to the cross death. And that doesn't really make sense because we're sort of desensitized to the cross. We see it everywhere, on churches, in graveyards, on shirts and necklaces. People make the sign of the cross superstitiously. We have been inundated with the cross, so we don't know really and truly the humiliation of a death on the cross. It's one thing to become obedient to the point of death. It was a whole other thing to die on the cross. Not only was it the worst possible method of execution that existed at the time, it was slow, it was agonizing, it took you days to die from torture. But it was a personal humiliation too. It was so bad that it was illegal for a Roman citizen to be crucified. Doesn't matter what you did. You could attempt to kill Caesar, and they'd put you to death, but it was illegal for you to be crucified. Only slaves and non-citizens could die in that way. It was so terrible and humiliating and excruciating. And yet, the one who existed eternally, the one who created the heavens and the earth, he stepped down. He took on flesh. He lived as a man. He hungered, he thirsted, and he was even willing to take on the cross death. Now, let's pause for just a second here. What is the point of this text? I want to emphasize that because if you don't understand that all of this is a sermon illustration about humility, you're going to lose sight of what this is teaching about Jesus and the truth that he was divine. Because if it is as the Jehovah's Witnesses say, if it is that Jesus was an angelic being, he was the first and the most magnificent of God's creation, but a created being nonetheless, then the act of humility becomes that he didn't try to be like God. Oh, Jesus, he was just so humble because although it was created, he didn't try to be like God. Where's the humility in that? That would be like if we're going to rewind back to the 1980s when Michael Jordan was playing for the Chicago Bulls. This would be like if those last seconds are on the clock, the score is tied, and Michael Jordan's going to step in and he's going to make the game-winning shot. This would be like the water boy sitting on the sidelines thinking, well, I could step in, I could do that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to sit this one out, let Michael Jordan take care of that. That's not humility. He's not even on the team. If Jesus is a creation of God, and the humility here is simply not trying to reach out and grasp toward divinity, that's not humility of mind. He's simply not committing blasphemy. On the other hand, if Jesus is the eternally existing Son of God, he possesses equality with the Father, but he doesn't consider it something to hold on to. Instead, he lays that aside. He serves others in humility, even so far as suffering and dying on a cross to bring redemption. That is true humility. And that's the entire point that Paul is trying to illustrate here. Now, Thankfully, we've come to the cross. We've come to the furthest extent of Jesus' humiliation. But that's not the end. It doesn't stay there. Verse 9 says, "Therefore God also highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth." I'm so glad that Brother Roger chose to read from the book of Isaiah as we were preparing our minds to commune this morning. And friends, we need to get more familiar with the book of Isaiah than we are already. And really, I'm speaking to myself here. But any Christian of Jewish background who is reading this would instantly recognize Paul is quoting from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 23. There it says, "Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. I've sworn by myself, the word has gone forth from my mouth in righteousness and will not turn back, that to me every knee will bow, every tongue will swear allegiance. They will say of me, only in Yahweh are righteousness and strength." This is about the one true God, Jehovah God. And it's a prophecy about the gospel. Yahweh says, all the people of the earth will come to know me and to bow before me. And yet it's interesting, when you go read the book of Acts, which is the historical record of this prophecy's fulfillment, the gospel going out across the world, they're preaching the name of Jesus. They're baptizing in the name of Jesus. They are healing the sick and raising the dead in the name of Jesus. And it's Jesus' name for which they are suffering and dying. Where did they get this idea? To quote from this Old Testament prophecy about Yahweh and apply it to Jesus. Well, Luke 24, verses 44 and 45 tells us that when Jesus appeared to them after his resurrection, now he said to them, "These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. Jesus preached these very things about himself from the Old Testament scriptures. I wonder if this was one of the passages, Isaiah chapter 45, which Jesus opened their minds to. So you see, there's no contradiction here in preaching and proclaiming the name of Jesus and somehow taking glory away from the Father. Because Jesus' name and preaching in his name is synonymous with preaching Jehovah, the one true God, Yahweh. Just like the next verse states, verse 11, "And that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father." In the Greek Old Testament, which these Christians certainly would have read and been familiar with, the name of God, Yahweh, is rendered as Kurios, Lord. They knew what Paul was saying. He said, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That is a spiritual statement about Jesus' divinity. Remember, 1 Corinthians 12:3, no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. That's a spiritual confession. It's like saying, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. But you know what? That's not just a spiritual statement. That is a politically charged statement as well. Because these Christians lived under the Roman Empire. They were a colony of Rome. And Rome required its citizens to proclaim Caesar is Lord. Not long after this was written, it would be instituted as a law. Before you would be allowed to buy and sell in the marketplace and get food for your family, you would have to offer incense and proclaim in front of a magistrate, Caesar is Lord. And they didn't care if you walked out of there and walked right to the nearest temple and worshiped somebody or something else, as long as you came in and you paid lip service to Caesar. But you know what? Christians wouldn't do that. Christians wouldn't do it. Because not only could they not say Caesar is Lord, they positively proclaimed Jesus Christ is Lord, to the exclusion of all others. In fact, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, Caesar's included, that Jesus Christ is Lord. It didn't end well for those Christians who proclaimed that. It started with imprisonment. It continued with them being rounded up and being set upon in the gladiatorial arena by wild animals. And it even progressed to the point under Nero that Christians would be wrapped in animal skin and they would be covered in pitch and stuck up on a pole and set on fire to provide light for Nero's dinner parties. That is what the Christians of old stuck by in their confession, Jesus Christ is Lord. We may very well face similar persecution in the coming future. I don't know. It certainly sounds a lot like what our culture tells us already today, that you can worship whoever you want just as long as you keep it to yourself, and you also pay homage to us and what we think is important and is true. But let's take encouragement from the fact that we're not the first to face such difficulty, and we certainly will not be the last. We stand in good company if we keep the faith, and we always confess to everyone Jesus Christ is Lord. And of course, it doesn't stop there. It's not that we're directing glory away from the Father toward the Son, but this is all to the glory of God the Father. Just as Jesus said in John 5:19, the Son can do nothing of himself. And verse 23 says, he who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Perfect unity and equality exists between the Father and the Son. So to cry out, Jesus Christ is Lord, is to do so to the glory of the Father. Friends, you need to know, as this prophecy states, there is coming a time on that great and final day when no matter how you lived or what you thought was true, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess Jesus Christ is Lord. All creatures, all creation will acknowledge the truth eventually. Jesus is Lord. And the call for us today, as verse 12 says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. This day, in light of this knowledge, if you're not right with the Lord, if you are far away from the Father's house this morning, you don't acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord, either in name, or you don't even profess it in your life and in your actions. Now is the day of salvation. In that day, the great and final day, you will have no choice. You will be forced to confess the truth. Jesus Christ is Lord. And if you do it then, it certainly won't be to your credit. But Jesus says in Matthew 10, verses 32 and 33, if we boldly confess him before men, He will confess us before the Father in heaven. And the opposite is true. If we deny him before men, if we're too ashamed to proclaim this about Jesus, that he is Lord, he'll be ashamed and he will deny us before the Father in heaven. Friends, how is it with you this morning? Do you proclaim Jesus as Lord over your life? If not, you need to get things right before it's too late. If you have some spiritual need, either you are ready and willing and happy to come confessing and proclaiming Jesus Christ as Lord, or you've strayed away from his fold, but you're ready to come back, or you have some spiritual need that you want to present to the congregation, we can take it to the Lord in prayer. Whatever it may be, if you've been stirred by the words of this hymn, come forward while we stand and sing this song.